The months-long build-up of Russian troops on the border with Ukraine has turned now into an invasion. Ukraine under attack. Military bases, airports and aircraft have been targeted and bombed.
On February 24, 2022, the world watched in horror as Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, marking the start of a brutal and protracted conflict that has since devastated the region and reshaped the geopolitical landscape. The decision by Russian President Vladimir Putin to order the assault was the culmination of years of simmering tensions and unresolved disputes between the two neighboring countries, rooted in a complex web of historical, political, and strategic factors. According to military and political experts, the primary drivers behind Russia's invasion of Ukraine can be traced to a combination of geopolitical ambitions, nationalist ideologies, and a desire to reassert Moscow's influence in the region. This war is not just about Ukraine, it's about Russia's place in the world, explains Dr. Fiona Hill, a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution and former senior director for Europe and Russia on the U.S. National Security Council. Putin sees the expansion of NATO and the West's influence in Ukraine as a direct threat to Russia's security and its status as a great power. Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014 and the subsequent conflict in eastern Ukraine's Donbas region had already set the stage for the 2022 invasion. The roots of this war go back to 2014 when Russia first intervened in Ukraine, notes Dr. Olga Oliker, program director for Europe and Central Asia at the International Crisis Group. Putin has long viewed Ukraine as an integral part of Russia's sphere of influence, and he was determined to prevent it from aligning with the West. In the years leading up to the 2022 invasion, Russia had grown increasingly assertive in its demands for Ukraine to remain within its orbit of influence. Putin viewed Ukraine's aspirations to join NATO and the European Union as a direct challenge to Russia's regional hegemony, and he was willing to use military force to prevent this from happening. For Putin, the prospect of Ukraine joining NATO was a red line that he was not willing to cross, explains Dr. Dmitry Trenin, a former director of the Carnegie Moscow Center. He saw it as an existential threat to Russia's security, and he was determined to take action to prevent it. Nationalist and ideological factors also shaped Russia's decision to invade. Putin has long embraced a vision of a greater Russia, rooted in the belief that Ukraine is an integral part of the Russian cultural and historical sphere. This nationalist narrative has been a central pillar of the Kremlin's propaganda efforts, portraying the invasion as a necessary step to protect ethnic Russians and Russian speakers in Ukraine. Putin has consistently portrayed Ukraine as an artificial state created by the Bolsheviks, and he has argued that it rightfully belongs within the Russian world, says Dr. Fiona Hill. This ideological conviction has been a key driver of his actions as he seeks to reassert Russia's dominance over what he sees as its rightful territory. The human toll of this conflict has been staggering. According to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, as of February 2024, some 31,000 Ukrainian soldiers have been killed since the start of the Russian invasion. The number of Russian military casualties is likely much higher, with a U.S. intelligence report estimating that 315,000 Russian troops had been killed or wounded as of December 2023. The civilian impact has been equally devastating, with the United Nations Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine reporting over 30,000 civilian casualties, including 10,582 killed and 19,875 injured. Millions of Ukrainians have been displaced, either internally or as refugees, further compounding the humanitarian crisis. As the war enters its third year, there is a complex and uncertain picture of the conflict's trajectory. While Ukraine has managed to recapture 54% of the territory occupied by Russia, the Ukrainian counteroffensive, launched in June 2023, has stalled, with Russian forces proving resilient and entrenched. As things stand, Ukraine is highly dependent on foreign supplies of ammunition and weapons, explains Dr. Hussein Aliyev, a lecturer in Central and East European Studies at the University of Glasgow. Unless Ukraine ramps up its domestic production and improves its mobilization and recruitment, it is likely to lose the rest of the Donbas region this year, as well as some territories in the south. There are growing concerns about donor fatigue, as the protracted nature of the conflict strains resources and public patience in the West. This, coupled with Russia's fortification of its defensive lines, has led some experts to predict a prolonged stalemate, or even the possibility of a frozen conflict in the coming years. I suspect a move for some kind of peace may be possible in 2025, says Professor Anthony King, director of the Strategy and Security Institute at the University of Exeter. But I'm deeply skeptical that Ukraine will be able to retake all its terrain lost to Russia. I think we will move to a frozen conflict or an unhappy treaty which partitions Ukraine. Ultimately, the complex and multifaceted nature of the conflict in Ukraine, with its roots stretching back decades and its future trajectory remaining highly uncertain. As the world grapples with the ongoing consequences of Russia's invasion, the lessons of this conflict will undoubtedly shape the geopolitical landscape for years to come. This war is not just about Ukraine, it's about the future of Europe and the global order, warns Dr. Fiona Hill. The outcome will have profound implications for the balance of power, the credibility of international law, and the ability of nations to chart their own course. The stakes could not be higher.